important to note that Ange is currently doing his press conference at the moment, and he's talking of the team news, and he says, from who are available for selection against Fulham, the only one that's missing is Giovanni Lo Celso. He's got a bit of a quad strain, nothing too serious. Hopefully he'll be back after the international break, and that's why he was taken off at half-time. So it looks as though Mickey van de Ven is fine after that knock he did pick up in that Fulham game, so that's positive.
Very positive. I think considering he was limping at the end, I think everyone was fearing the worst, especially because he was so like head and shoulders above anyone else in that backline. You're thinking if he's out, we're really struggling if any of those other players in the backline have to fill in for him. So very good news that he's fit and available to play. We're going to need him. So I'm delighted with that news.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Obviously, the head-to-head between Spurs and Burnley, not too much to read into it, seeing as Burnley were in the Championship last year. And not only were they in the Championship last year, but the last time they were in the Premier League, it was a completely different look. Burnley side, it was under Sean Dyche, playing low-block football, very defensive style. And it's going to be a completely different game this time round. They've got Vincent Kompany now. They like to play on the front foot. They like to press high up the pitch. And I think this one will play into our favour, to be honest. And I think for me, from what I've seen from Burnley so far, they're a bit too naive in what they're doing in the Premier League so far. And I think that's going to be to their detriment, in my opinion. And I think they are one of the candidates so far from what I've seen to go down this year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be to their detriment when they play teams like Man City and Aston Villa. I think, and look, they're now coming up to their third game is Tottenham, so they've had a very difficult start. It doesn't get much harder for teams like Burnley when you have that kind of start. I think their wins are. They're going to be judged against teams in the lower half. That's where they're going to be making their money better, basically, when it comes to getting points on the board. So I think it's hard to be too harsh on them when it comes to how they've started to life in the Premier League. But as well, you have to say they just haven't made life difficult enough for their opposition so far when it comes to stopping them with their attacks and being too open. They like to play with a 4-4-2 with two strikers and get players up the pitch, play with wide wingers, play with two strikers very centrally when they press, and they like to press high and be aggressive. But it might have worked in the Championship when you've got maybe less technical players you're facing, and maybe you've got them superior players. But when you're coming to the Premier League and you're facing the big teams like Man City and Aston Villa, you just can't allow them that kind of space, and you can't be that naive to think that you can play them off the park like you did teams in the Championship. And for the first two games, they've definitely come unstuck. They've definitely the first two games, they've made life really easy for the opposition to just pick them off and score goals on the counter-attack. You saw against Man City that Edison, that second half, they were just playing balls long to Haaland because they knew that Burnley were just pressing all the way up. They were throwing all the risk, and they knew one long ball to Haaland, he was in on goal, and it really worked a treat for them many times. Aston Villa were sitting deep and just knew if they soaked up enough pressure from Burnley without too much trouble, they're going to have the quality to hit them on the counter-attack going the other way because they've got the superior players in that regard, and Burnley are going to leave themselves open. So it'll be interesting to see if they do go for a new approach, Burnley, in this game, if they notice that, or if they're going to continue with their principles, which I envision they will because it's still very early on. And if they do that, I think that's going to play into Tottenham's hands.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned those first two games of the season against Man City and Aston Villa, which I thought, they just were way too naive. Like, if you bring up those stats of the first, that's including pre-season as well, in the first two games of the season, you talk about Man City going direct to Haaland. Spurs don't really have that option with, we've got Richarlison, who's probably going to be fit for this game. He'll probably start number 9, or you could face Heung-min Son up there, but they don't have that kind of presence up front where we can just lump the ball forward from a Mickey van de Ven, from a Cuti Romero, that will make it stick up there. So do you think maybe the way Spurs play, how do you think that will impact the way Burnley play?
I think I actually think Burnley are going to probably stick with their 4-4-2 because I think they're going to want those two strikers to press on our centre-backs to try and limit our build-up play. So it's going to be vital that when we do that, instead of like most teams having one striker with maybe a 4-3-3 and then you have one striker on the centre-back and maybe move a midfielder into the centre, they're going to have those two strikers. So they're going to have wingers and the midfielder and the two centre mids already in those central positions. So we're going to have to be very careful when we do that. And look, I think there's a reason why Man City went long in that second half, and it wasn't just totally because it wasn't totally because they saw the gaps in the back, which they did, but it's more just to completely bypass that Burnley press. There's no need to engage in it when you can just go long into Haaland and he can hold the ball up. Now, we have Richarlison, unfortunately, in the forward line, he's going to be fit to play, so there's probably a good chance he plays. Can I see him getting the same joy against the Burnley centre-backs than Haaland was? And if he doesn't, then he's not going to make it stick enough, and that's going to be a problem for us if the balls continue coming back. So we've got to have to watch that situation. But what I like about what I've seen in the first 3 Premier League games anyway is that different teams have asked us a few different questions to our pressing game and our build-up play, and we've been able to find some solutions. So against Brentford, we were very much inverted, but against Man United, the fullbacks were a bit wider because they knew that Man United were going to focus on pressing us through the centre, and so we found the solution. So I'm backing Ange to go into this game with his eyes open on how Burnley are going to press us with their 2 strikers and come up with solutions. But it might mean Maddison again has to drop deep and provide that extra option, so it allows us to bypass their press. Or it means that, look, Richarlison's going to have to be in with a battle, and we're going to have to go long sometimes, and he's going to have to make it stick in the forward line. So I think there are different solutions, but I think we haven't come up against a 2-striker system yet, so it'll be interesting to see how we fare.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously Van de Ven being fit is a massive plus for us for this one, as well as Coutinho Romero. I think they're going to be so important for us coming into this game, as they are every game. It's a shame that probably Brennan Johnson, I mean, the deadline's passed now for him to be available for the game tomorrow. If we were to sign him, I think 12 o'clock was that deadline. But in a game like this, like Brennan Johnson with that pace in behind would have been, how vital would he have been in this game?
I think he would have had, well, it depends, because whether Burnley want to dominate, will try to dominate, and whether they are forced back because we actually are going to dominate the ball, and because we've been quite good at keeping possession. I think Kulu will definitely have his assets, but I definitely think on the occasions where Burnley do have the ball on the ground and are keeping possession, which we know they can do, someone like Brennan Johnson, who's just ready to go as soon as we win possession to burst into that space they leave, would be a massive asset. But I envisage us to dominate possession, to be honest. I do think we're going to have the majority of the ball. So in that sense, I think Kulu will be just fine in this kind of game.
In terms of, you're looking at the Burnley team, the 2 players that we've picked out as the one to watch is Amdouni, who scored 12 goals and got 4 assists in the Championship last season in 32 games, and Sander Berge, their new signing, who I think is a really good player, to be honest. 6 goals and 5 assists last season for Sheffield United in the Championship. Massive loss to give for Sheffield United, just to sell to a rival who have come up from the Championship last year. And I don't get this trend. Why would Sheffield United let that happen? Yeah,
it doesn't make sense to me, and especially because they've replaced him, but have they really replaced him with a player who's as good as what Sander Berge was offering them? I remember when he signed for Sheffield United back in, I think it was 2020, like in lockdown, and he was a very good player back then. I think he really fit into the Premier League. Obviously, he's been back down to the Championship now, but he's obviously been fantastic, one of the main players in the Championship for Sheffield United. I think Burnley have done really well to get him through the door, and I think he's a really good box-to-box midfielder, very good off the ball, but also has a decent technical ability. He reminds me a bit like of Pierre Højbjerg, to be honest, the way he plays. Like, he's like very good. He's like good at all facets of the game. I don't think he's like outstanding at anything, but I think he's very good at a lot of different aspects. He's a very good all-rounder.
Very hard worker.
Yeah, very hard worker as well. So I think he's definitely one where if he has a good day, he's going to be very hard to stop him. It's going to be about making sure that Bissouma's on top of his game to make sure that he doesn't have too much influence on this game.
If you bring up the predicted 11 for Burnley, you see there's a lot of doubts and injuries for Burnley, but looking at that 11 and the way they set up, does anything worry you coming into this game?
Nothing really overly concerns me. I think their back line is definitely suspect. I think we've seen that already. I think they can definitely be got at. They don't seem too strong. They seem a bit brittle, to be honest, for a Premier League level, although they were strong in the Championship. Going forward, I actually like Amdouni. I like what I've seen so far. He's been one of the ones who actually seems to be trying to make things happen in the forward line, albeit he's had limited amount of the ball, and it's been hasn't really been able to get any sort of goals and assists or or anything. But I think it's just going to be a case of if we're good enough of playing through their press and making sure that there's no amount of high turnovers, we're going to have more than enough of quality to open them up, especially with Maddison in the form he's in. And it's whether we can take the chances. I think we're going to be able to create a number of chances in this game. To be honest, I see a kind of game where we're dominating and having many chances and many shots, because I don't think Burnley want to sit back, and I don't think they're very good at doing that when they're doing it. I think if we were talking about them under Sean Dyche or another team, it would be a lot more difficult for us. But I'm looking at them under Vincent Kompany, and it's not to say that, you know, maybe when they do come up against a Bournemouth or a different kind of team, they can get a lot more joy when the quality isn't as high. But against teams like Spurs, who have shown already this season that defensively we've been fairly strong, and we've been very press resistant when we're asked questions, and we're able to play through teams like we showed against Bournemouth, then I think they're gonna have their work out, and it's going to be a case of quality shining through, in my opinion.
And in terms of what lineup Spurs are going to potentially play, I do imagine it's probably going to be unchanged from the previous two Premier League games. And you're looking at midfield of Bissouma, Sarr and Maddison. I mean, surely that's going to be too much for Burnley to handle in the middle of the park there. Yeah,
because I think it has too much energy, and I think the most important thing is Bissouma. He's just, when he gets on the ball and he's being pressed, and you're asking him, can you beat a couple players and create the space? We know he can do that. And do I think Burnley have the capability? I'm looking at Burnley's team, and do I think they have that midfield who are going to be capable of stopping them? I just can't see it. I think that he's going to be too strong for them. And obviously, he had a bit of a dodgy period in the second half against Bournemouth, ended up getting taken off, but he has had now a free week. Didn't play at all in the Carabao Cup against Fulham, so I'm expecting him to be fresh as ever, as solid as ever. And I think that him being back to his best is going to be the key thing to get us the win. And that is where I think that midfield, being able to play through them and create the space, that's where the game's going to be won, in my opinion.
So having said that, how do you see the game playing out, and what are your predictions going into it?
I've predicted 3-0 Spurs. I think that Burnley will huff and puff without much joy, a bit like Bournemouth. I reckon they'll have a few moments where they threaten to create openings, and maybe we'll have a few shots. But I just don't see the quality there to really, especially with the news that Van de Ven is fit and ready to play. I don't see the quality there to really hurt our backline, and I don't see the quality in their backline to stop us creating the volume of chances that would be required to win this game. So I just think with Maddison in full flight, our first team didn't have the game time in midweek as well, so they should be fresh going into this game. And Burnley did play in midweek as well. I think they played actually, they also rested a lot of players, but you know, I think they probably played a few more first team players than we did. So I've gone for 3-0 Spurs.
Yeah, I was just going to check to see what kind of team that they did play in the Carabao Cup. Who did they play in the Carabao?
Forest away, and they won.
And they won
1-0.
So you imagine if they did win,
I looked at their team. I think it was fairly rested, to be fair. I think like Jay Rodriguez played up front, Goodmanson. It wasn't the kind of first team.
Yeah, actually, none of the players I think that we were talking about there even played. They got Muric in goal, Vitinho, Ekdal, O'Shea and Taylor at the back, Brownhill and Redmond in midfield, with Brun Larson, Ramsey, Gudmundsson and Rodriguez up top. So fairly rested, to be fair.
Yeah.
But I do think Spurs should be able to completely take the game to Burnley this weekend. I think the way they play will actually suit the way we want to play as well. There'll be a lot of space for Spurs players to play in. I think man for man, I just think we're just so superior to them in every position, to be honest. I think the defence will be able to handle anything that comes their way. The midfield should be able to dominate the proceedings as well. So I kind of agree with you. I think in my predictions, I said 2-0, and I'll stick with it, to be honest, but hopefully Richarlison can get on that score sheet two games in a row. So I'm going 2-0. My brother's going 3-0. Let me know your score predictions in the comment section below. That is your match preview for the Burnley game. And let me know how you think the game is going to pan out.